I'm going to terminate all sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are sanctuary for criminals. They're sanctuaries for criminals.
Sanctuary cities have been the bane of the GOP's existence, and as a result, Republican Representative James Comer is now launching investigations into sanctuary cities and has called on 4 separate Democratic mayors to testify before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform to answer some questions about how the sanctuary policies are playing out in their jurisdictions. Now, sanctuary cities, of course, prevent or limit local police from cooperating with federal immigration officials. It's important to know that not all sanctuary city laws are the same. There are some variations, but nonetheless, opponents of these policies, much like you heard from Donald Trump there, mainly argue that sanctuary cities help to harbor undocumented individuals who are committing crimes in these cities, in these states. And so the mayors who have been invited to essentially testify before the House include Michelle Wu, who's the mayor of Boston, Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, who, to be quite honest with you, should probably be investigated for other reasons, including his conflicts of interest with the teachers union in Chicago. But I digress. Mike Johnston is another mayor. He is the mayor of Denver. And then finally, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, has been called to testify before the House. Now, the letter said 12 states and hundreds of cities and counties across the country have sanctuary policies. However, Comer said the 4 cities singled out stand out in their abject failure to comply with federal law. But that's not exactly true. In fact, Mayor Eric Adams in particular is more than willing to play ball with the federal agencies in deporting undocumented individuals who are committing crimes in New York City. In fact, he's quoted as saying, this is from August of 2024, people who are violent New Yorkers should not be allowed to stay in our city. What we need to alter are those who are repeat violent offenders. After they serve their time, they should be turned over to ICE and be removed from our city. And here's another example of him saying similar things about their sanctuary policies in New York.
Those small numbers that are committing crimes, we need to modify the sanctuary city law that if you commit a felony, a violent act, we should be able to turn you over to ICE and have you deported. It is a right to live in this city, and you should be not committing crimes in our city for doing so.
Mayor Adams is trying to do the right thing. The problem is he has a city council that doesn't want him to work with ICE, but he has committed on a couple of things. Number one, he's committed to working with public safety threats with ICE, having his officers with us shoulder to shoulder to arrest public safety threats in that city, because that's what we're going to prioritize day one. Day one, right out the gate, are going to be public safety threats and national security threats. He agrees with me. There's plenty in New York City. He wants to make New York City safer.
Now, that's not the case for the other mayors who have been called to testify before the House. We'll get to them in just a moment. But Cenk, I think Tom Homan actually makes a good point in regard to the city council, because if James Comer thinks that the mayor and the mayor alone can unilaterally decide whether or not a jurisdiction is going to be a sanctuary city, he's mistaken. The city council makes that decision.
Yeah, so I've got mixed feelings on these hearings. And I'm curious what you guys are gonna say. We've got a poll in the live chat going here. Do you support sanctuary city policies? Yes, no, or some, but not all. I'm in that last category. I'll tell you why in a second. But I'm curious what you guys think. That's why I love doing the show live at 6 o'clock Eastern and interacting with you guys. All right, so in terms of these hearings, normally Comer's hearings are a joke. They're kangaroo court style hearings. They're not really meant to accomplish anything. They're just meant to harm the Democrats. So has he grown principles and this one's gonna be for real? No, I'm sure he's doing it to harm Democrats, etc. right? Now, having said that, the Democrats don't have to be harmed by it. They can go and make their case for sanctuary cities. They could do it, these mayors can, and the Democratic Congress people can. And I think there is a case to be made for sanctuary cities, or at least some of the laws in regard to sanctuary cities. So they could actually turn this into interesting and productive hearings and have the whole country watch and make a case for and against sanctuary cities, and then we could all judge for on our own, because that debate is never held in public.
It's never, you're right.
Almost none of these policy debates are ever held in public. So whether Comer meant it well or not, which he didn't, that's okay. It could be used for well. And by the way, if you're a Republican and you say, oh, I hate sanctuary cities, that also gives you an opportunity to make that case.
I want to understand the nuances between the different cities that will be represented as part of these hearings. And look, I generally speaking agree with you. A lot of these hearings, whether they're called on by the Democratic side or the Republican side, it's just all about political theater. It's not about accomplishing anything. But you're also right that these hearings could potentially accomplish something. And what I want to understand are the various nuances in these sanctuary laws, how similar they are from one another, how they differ from one another. Because look, I think that there are certain elements of sanctuary laws that should stay in place. So for instance, if someone is in the country and they're undocumented, if they haven't committed any other crime, they haven't had any other issues, nothing should stop them from being able to go to the authorities if they are a victim of a crime or if they're a victim of domestic abuse. And so, or let's say something happens to them health-wise and they want to go to the doctor, like there needs to be certain protections so these individuals aren't further victimized because of their inability to go to authorities when they need help. However, I also agree with individuals who are concerned about sanctuary laws that essentially help to harbor undocumented individuals who are committing other crimes, other serious crimes. And we have seen that play out in some of these cities.
Yeah. So look, I agree with you, and let me give you a specific example. So if a woman is sexually assaulted and she's an undocumented immigrant and she goes and reports that, and they have to ask her if she's undocumented, and then they have to turn her in, well, then people are not going to want to report crimes, including very serious crimes like that one, which one then will leave the perpetrators out in the open and not prosecuted, not found, not arrested, etc.
Everyone loses.
Yeah, everyone loses. That's a terrible idea. So that's one way that sanctuary cities are very positive, okay? Now, on the other hand, they're not wrong that it also protects people who are felons who then get released. And normally if you're a felon and that's an undocumented immigrant, you should be deported. And so, and if you don't think that they should, okay, that's an opinion too. But the overwhelming majority of not just Americans, but even Democratic voters believe they should be deported if they're felons.
Right.
And undocumented immigrants. So that's why I say, well, maybe we should reform it. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Mayor Adams, but that point he made in that clip we showed you about, you got to at least reform that part.
100%.
I totally agree with. And remember, guys, also for the sake of like order and rule, because the feds are going to try to pick those people up anyway. So if the states don't say voluntarily, oh, come to the prison, they're about to be released, you can pick them up, then ICE has to do raids to pick them up.
Exactly, and we don't want the raids.
Scarier. And then when they do the raids, they also pick up what they're now calling collateral, people who are undocumented who didn't commit crimes,
right.
And that's much worse. So I say nuance because it depends on which exact provision we're talking about.
Now, the other mayors have decided to double down on supporting and backing their sanctuary policies. So for instance, Michelle Wu, who of course is the mayor of Boston, essentially said to a local television station, WCVB, what we can do is make sure that we are doing our part to protect our residents in every possible way, that we are not cooperating with those efforts that actually threaten the safety of everyone by causing widespread fear and having large-scale economic impact. And the Chicago mayor, Brandon Johnson, releases similar statements. This is just one of them. He says, I find it unconscionable that this administration would attempt to create not just division, but fear within our public schools, Johnson said, referring to potential federal raids. Now, so far, there hasn't been any ICE raids in any elementary schools, even though there was an erroneous story reported last Friday about that. It turns out that it wasn't actually ICE agents who showed up to an elementary school in Chicago. It was actually members of the Secret Service who showed up to investigate a serious threat that was made toward a government official. They never entered the school. They identified themselves, including to the principal, who then went on to claim that ICE was trying to do a raid in the elementary school. We need to be careful, and we need to not instill fear in anyone using these like fake stories, because it's unfair to people, right? Like, we need to be accurate about what's actually happening on the ground. And in this case, there wasn't a raid in the elementary school, but that's not to say that it couldn't happen in the future.
Yeah, so Avenger Dragon 89 on Twitch made a good point, saying the federal courts have been clear that you cannot force states to enforce unfunded mandates. So that's a good extra element here. So if the federal government is going to say, hey, states, you must do X, Y, or Z, well, then they have to provide the funding for that. So again, here we're consistent. When they started busing the immigrants to blue cities, we said, look, I get it. I don't know why the border states have to take all the responsibility for themselves, but the federal government should provide those cities with assistance. Otherwise, it's just dumping it in their lap, and that's not really fair. And the same thing for unfunded mandates, including cooperating with ICE.
Right.
So that's got to be funded as well.
Exactly.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.